All right, well, we'll get officially going. Good evening. Got a rather ambitious agenda, although I think we should be able to push through it pretty, I won't say quickly, but push through it nonetheless. So Alan is not here. John? Here. Greg? Here. Michelle?
Here.
Jim? Not here. Stephanie? Lisa? Here. There you are. Michelle, well, I said you already. Michael? Here. Julie?
Here.
Pete?
Here.
Jennifer?
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. So we can move to item B on the agenda, comments from the public. Seeing none. See, I told you we can move through this quickly. We're going to get to item C, the consent agenda. Are there any questions on the minutes from the previous board meeting?
Just one thing on that. Maybe we should take it off the consent agenda and look at it. I saw a bunch of what seemed like mistakes, but I don't know if they're really mistakes. There were a lot of N's that looked like R's, but that could very well be the resolution on my screen.
When we upload it onto the drive, for some reason it does that. Notice that too.
Okay. But it's not incorrect.
You print it out.
Okay, thank you. Then I have no comments, and we don't need to take it off the consent agenda.
Okay. Other than that, then the item on the consent agenda, the minutes from the December 17th board meeting passes. Moving to the next item on the agenda is special recognition. Would you like to?
I would very much like to take the microphone at this time. I think we all know Bob Geeson, who makes certain that all of the things that can happen in this school district are not only funded, but are well researched. He asks questions to make certain that nothing is happening by mistake, everything is done by plan. I have to tell you that when I first walked into this position, Bob said to me he was here because he was going to make certain that he saw through a transition. He was going to make certain that the children of Region 12 were taken care of. And at that point, I liked Bob. It was official. And where he has already retired, he obviously doesn't do it well. But we're hoping that we can give him and afford him the opportunity to actually enjoy that retirement. We know that Nicole Grant has some very big shoes to fill. I know that everything that Bob has done, the reason we are where we are right now with our new construction, with our building, it's because of Bob. And it's because of the fact that he's always made certain that the numbers were matching. He would take a look and he would say, well, no, we can look at it this way, we can do it this way, and he saw possibility and we appreciate. So tonight, Bob, not only do we celebrate you for all you are, but I'm going to say to you, we're behind me, over here, what Colin has and what Colin is bringing out to you is a shovel hit the ground because of you, Bob. And so I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for your service to Region 12. And at this time, if anyone else would like to share in the celebration and say any words about Bob before we start cutting cake.
There's this learning curve that comes into play when you have to go home and spend 24 hours a day. I'm prepared. I'm not so sure she's going to be prepared. Well, she may be digging a hole in the backyard.
I was going to say.
You're in the spot. All that's left is his little hand sticking up out of the ground. It's been a pleasure. It's a long journey. It's long. But when you get there, it's fun. Now let you all know how much fun I might be having. The reality is that it's for kids. That's it.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, Bob, on behalf of the board, I certainly want to say thank you for all the years that you've given Region 12, many of which I was not part of this board, so I only got to see the tail end of Bob. But it's a pleasure to work with somebody who knows their business. Yeah, and, and I think, your words about being about the kids certainly ring true for me.
Seriously, that's all it's about.
So if you do get bored and you do need a place to hide, Region 12 is always open, Bob. You always come back and see us.
Appreciate that. Well, thank you for everything.
Michelle, do you want to say something?
Thank you, Bob. I mean, there's not a lot more I can say. It's been many, many, many years. I'm sorry Valerie can't be here because I know. No, Jim, but he's not here at the moment, right? But Valerie, so I joined the finance committee, I believe my first year back in 2004. So we've been on the committee together for many, many years through 3 superintendents. And one thing was always clear is that Bob knows his numbers. So that continuity has been really, it has really helped our district as we've gone through some very tumultuous times. But knowing that our numbers are solid and that our audits are clean and that we know where all our dollars are, that has always been one place of confidence that the communities have with our region, and that is because of you, Bob. So I appreciate that immensely as we've been through.
Supported it and we just managed it. If they didn't give it to us, we would have problems. They gave it to us and we managed to put it in the right places.
Yep.
And going forward, you don't have big holes in pension and other things long term. So you're in pretty good shape, and I'm happy about it.
Good. Well, thank you very much. We are happy too.
Greg?
Yeah, I just want to say, Bob, please don't take it the wrong way that we presented you with a shovel. That was not what was intended. But but I've got to say, I don't know how I would have how I would get through building committee meetings without your numbers, because those I actually understand. And we know how impenetrable the sheets that we get from our construction manager are, but you distill it down so that I can easily understand it, and that's not hard. That's an amazing thing, because accountants and me just don't. I never quite understand how people accounted for things. Well, you have, and you've given me the confidence knowing that our numbers were in line and we were in good shape, and I didn't have to worry because I knew you'd be on the phone to me if there was any problem. So appreciate that very much.
Michael?
I actually think that the shovel is very appropriate, because when I think of you, I think of somebody who's been building, not just the agri-science program, but building Chippewa. I think when you look back at some of the great things about Region 12, you're part of that, and I think that's something to be proud of. A lot of retirees, they get a chair, and I'd like to think that you have many active years in the future where you're going to be equally creative and equally building.
I would hope I have more years. That's my goal. We'll see what the good Lord gives me. Megan and I have talked many times. There's 2 tracks to this thing, and the track I happen to sit on doesn't have hands to the students, but it impacts what goes on there, and we've managed to maintain the credibility and delivering at the end of the day. It's good for the kids. Time to go home.
Well, at this time, I say we take time, we enjoy cake with Bob before we make him do some really hard work with the numbers we're going to present on our budget today. So if we could, please go over and we'll have Bob cut the cake for us.
Thank you.
Take a
again.
short recess.
Pictures.
All right. This is like, what, 3 board meetings in a row we've been fed. So,
I like you guys.
so now you know that there is absolutely no turning back. We've now established a pattern. We may even put it into a bylaw. Consider it. All right. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is the chair's report. So speaking of bylaws, we formed a bylaws committee a few weeks back. I had been, I think I mentioned this several times at previous board meetings, that we would start looking at the policies and the bylaws. And so we've begun the process of reviewing the bylaws, all of them. So we're going to start at the top and go to the bottom of the list. There are about 40, give or take, bylaws that we're chugging through. But on the committee is basically the executive committee. So that would be me, Michelle, Stephanie, Lisa, and I've asked Alan and Michael to join since it rounds out the representation of the 3 towns. So we have 2 from each town on the committee. We met for the first time last week. We meet again next week, and trying to keep the pace up so we can bring bylaws to the board for review every time we have a board meeting until we're done. So you hear more about this later, but the point an important point is to make is bylaws require 2/3 of the full board to pass. So that would be 8. And since we have 10, we have enough to move that process forward tonight. Now, the other note I'd like to make is, and Megan's going to talk about this in more detail, is we all know the applications are in. And we're off to a good start, certainly. Next big gate in the process is to review the applications and decide on the acceptances, which Megan will talk more about. So the numbers are encouraging. It's a good place to start. But I would advise us all to just be cautious in terms of spiking the football, because we have a long way to go before we claim absolute victory with what we set out, right? It's a great first data point, but it is not a trend. You know, we got to make sure that we keep doing more of this and learning how to do it better at each turn. But so far, so good. But we still have a process to go. So I think we're all anxious to hear, Megan, when you guys are done with the evaluation, how many are falling to that next ring of the funnel, and see where we are. So, but so far, so good. So over to you.
And I won't tease numbers yet. We will talk about that as we get into the agri-science portion of the report tonight. So talking about updates that are just going around the district. We did have Washington Primary's roof is starting its repair, so that is underway. But not just what's going on top of the roof, I'm also very excited to share that Washington Primary School is actually committed to leaving a smaller environmental footprint. And they've actually introduced metal straws into the school. And so the students all are issued a metal straw, and they have the little pipe cleaner, and the parents have all the instructions. And it's to reduce some of the waste that happens with the straws in the cafeteria. We do have the, little more paper straws in case the student does forget, but I definitely give credit to Washington Primary partnering with WPC in order to make certain we're teaching our students about the environment and things that we can do, that those little things that help each day. All of our schools were involved in the Hour of Code that happened in December. Anybody who saw our region in review saw a lot of our elementary. But I also want to share that at Chippewa, they really incentivized students. There were prizes, they talked it up each day, and really it was about getting students that practice, how many hours that they were logging. We want them to know that this is something that is meaningful. It is time that is taking in order to build what is some of those future careers that are out there. The class of 2018 publication will be going out within the next 2 weeks. It has gone through lots and lots and lots of editing. I don't think Debbie wants to look at it anymore. So we're very happy to sign off on that. So that will be coming into the homes of all of our residents. So that will be sent out as a mailer. So tonight I get to celebrate. We have some proud parents on the board. Oh, no, go ahead.
I think I've noticed the format goes like elementary and then secondary or Chippewa, so they alternate. And I was just wondering what the feedback was on that, if you've gotten any.
I think the first feedback we got was when we put out the first elementary. And people said, there were all these sporting events and you didn't mention anything. We can do better than that. So it was, I think sometimes we get very Chippewa-centric. And I didn't want to lose sight of some of the elementary, so giving them some of their own highlights. And so that was the rationale. However, I haven't gotten a lot of feedback one way or the other, so I'd be interested.
Well, I feel like it's just one voice, but I kind of like seeing highlights from all the schools each time because it is a long time for something to pass if you're going to acknowledge an award, winning states or whatever it is, or something, because I feel like the Region in Review is it's a biweekly, so it's just supposed to be highlights, not our in-depth newsletter. So to let a whole month, to let a whole month pass to not celebrate some of those small things seems like a long time. I understand though the not wanting to feel Chippewa heavy. So if you just 2 pages Chippewa, 2 pages Element, or whatever, I understand the desire for balance, but I feel like I'd like to see all the schools each time. But if that's harder, I understand.
No, I appreciate the feedback, so thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I do have things to celebrate, so they will be in the next Region in Review. But I do want to share, and I'm going to lift right out the words of Donna Wright regarding our Scholastic Art Awards. So Chippewa will be represented very well at the Scholastic Art Awards this year. The Scholastic Art Awards are presented by the Alliance of Young Artists and Writers. Each year, the Alliance partners with more than 100 visual artists and literary organizations across the country to bring the Scholastic Awards to local communities. The art teachers submit students' work from grades 7 through 12 at their local art association chapters. Local submissions are then judged by professionals. Panelists look forward to see the work that best exemplarize originality, technical skill, and emergence of personal voice or vision. The last year, they had more than 330,000 works of art that were submitted nationally. That said, we have 7 students from Chippewa that will be represented and are going forth. So they will have their arts on display at the University of Harvard Art School on Sunday, January 13th through Friday, February 1st. So our honorees. Oh, and I'm going to mess this one up. Paris Alfion, thank you, is the Gold Key winner for his pastel landscape. Gabriela Amato is a Silver Key winner for her block print. Edward Polskas is a Silver Key winner for his digital photograph. Erin Bailey, honorable mention for her scratch art illustration. Adriana Burrell is the honorable mention for her acrylic painting. Let me get this. Cariel? Did I get it correct? Okay. Grass is the honorable mention for her digital photograph, and Luis Messiana is the honorable mention for his tempera portrait. So congratulations, and it's great to see that our arts continue to showcase throughout. We also had indoor state qualifiers for indoor track. So Olivia Tibbetts and Gavin Block in the 300-meter run, and Cameron Brown in the 500-meter hurdles and long jumps. So congratulations for our state qualifiers already early in the season. To just update you, I had mentioned at our last board meeting that I was holding our PTO executive meeting. That was held last week. Last week? Yeah. Gosh, this has flown by. And we discussed, one of our main topics was the discussion about the building use off hours, as well as some district-wide events. And this year we weren't able to host the Harlem Wizards due to some parking constraints issues. So we are going to postpone that showcase of the Harlem Wizards either for a year or two. So we're going to work with the Chippewa PTO on that. But the good news is we continue to have some district-wide events. So the district-wide dance held at Washington Primary is on February 15th. So again, this initiative with our PTOs is to find ways that we can bring our towns together, have our schools work together, see if we can't pool our energies, because I think what came through loud and clear is there's a lot of need for volunteers, and it feels like it's a lot of drain on resources when they want to do these big events. And if the big events can come with a lot of the PTOs, they feel it's not as daunting of a task when you have many hands. So we did have some events. We had graduates come back to speak to our juniors and seniors about life beyond the Chippewa graduation. So we're very proud that their first active alumni is giving back to our own students with guidance and support, letting them know what to expect in their first years of college. So it's a great tradition and one we continue to hope continues. Tomorrow is the legislative breakfast for CABE. So anyone who is interested that is in Ridgefield, I know Michelle Gore and I are going. And then I also want to bring people's attention to the CABE on the Hill initiative. If you want to learn more about it, talk to Michelle. And just some updates with regards to personnel. We have an appointment of Christina Gorbecki, the educational assistant at Washington Primary School. We have a leave of absence that will be coming up with Sarah Fiola, the elementary teacher at WPS. She will be out from March 27th to May 28th. She will be having her second child. And we also have the resignation of the second shift custodian at Washington Primary, Jeff Mortarelli. And so we have it posted, and we look to fill that position very shortly.
You sure?
I feel like it does.
Okay. Glad you take this stuff seriously. All right. So, committee reports. Starting with Michelle at Advance.
So I don't know if you all get this in the mail or if I only get it as the representative, but Ed Advance periodically puts together a little report letting us know what we've taken advantage of at Ed Advance. And so they sort of list out the things that we've done. For example, 47 community members participated in the Foothills Adults and Continuing Ed non-mandated enrichment activities. Staff attended meetings on for English learners, different things. So I'll just pass this around because I don't know. Did you guys get this? No.
I don't think I did.
Yeah. So I'll pass that around. The only other thing I was going to mention was that the breakfast that is tomorrow is co-sponsored. It's CABE and Ed Advance because their district or their areas overlap, although they're not exactly the same, which is confusing sometimes. So if I don't know if you all got the email. We were supposed to email in questions or concerns. We should really think about anything that we feel the legislators need to keep in mind. So if you have anything that you would like me to mention tomorrow morning. I also noticed as I was looking, they just announced the makeup of the the state Education Committee for the legislature. And Eric Berthel, who is our state senator, is a ranking member. So we should keep that in mind. It is the first time in a while, or at least that I've been aware of, that we have a, he's our he's our senator. So it's been the first time in a long time we've had somebody who's a ranking member on on the Education Committee. So if we have concerns, hopefully we can have them heard. So that's that.
Education, Mike?
Just to give you a little bit of a tease for our upcoming meeting at the end of the month, we've got Lori Ferrara talking to the board about SAT results and next steps for what the administration and teachers have planned. So.
The executive, there's nothing to report on the executive committee. Greg, facilities.
I don't have anything to report to you. We're not meeting again until the 28th.
Finance?
Finance met tonight. We actually met twice since the last time we met. We met on January 4th with Charles Heaven and Megan and Bob and the committee to discuss the audit, but that's a little later in the agenda, so I can discuss that. But tonight, just say we're tracking a little ahead of last year at this time, 4.1%, so that's good. We're a little ahead of the game at this stage. There were a couple points of interest in like the 100 series. If you took a look at it, you'd see that the under 110 line, the new business manager is about to begin, so that line is going to be over a little bit till the end of the year. The computer tech line is a little bit over, but that's going to be rectified because we just needed to transfer some hours from elsewhere in the budget. It was in program changes, just hadn't been made yet. And then there was a librarian that was missed in the budget beginning, a part-time position, but it's in there now, so that'll also rectify. Anything else? Let me see. There was an update on the capital non-recurring balance. We talked about this in the last meeting too. We thought it was around $650,000. We were pretty much on target because the actual number is $649,053.36. And let's see. I've got a lot to talk about later, so I'm trying not to not to overload us now. Another minor note, heating prices have gone up, but thanks to Bob, we've locked in pricing for the next year. So, so we'll see that coming up. And we're going to be scheduling an extra meeting, most likely next week, a debt meeting with Barry Bernabe from Phoenix Advisors to talk about the debt service. So, yeah, pretty standard. We're tracking well, and yeah, the next big item is going to be the audit report, but I'll get to that in a couple minutes.
Good.
Yep. That's it.
Greg, negotiations?
Well, as you can tell from the agenda, we've included negotiations with the union representing the administrators. That would be up for our consideration in executive session tonight. And then afterwards, tomorrow we resume negotiations in the afternoon with the union representing our paraprofessionals and clerical staff. So that's where we are.
Okay, thank you. Policy? Michelle, anything other than what's on the agenda?
No, I don't think so. I
Okay.
don't think we've met since our last meeting.
Hey, John?
Yes, it looks like the bylaws were either instituted or amended in 97. Is that, were they instituted in 97?
I believe so. In 97,
Really?
if you look through the policy manual, it looks like the wholesale, like we bought the whole thing in 97. And I don't know how they did that, but the board just adopted them all. I didn't looked at the months to see if they
Okay,
went
so
through it in
would that
chunks,
come
but
from the state?
no, CABE.
It came from CABE.
CABE.
So what prompted the revisions this year?
Well, and I was actually going to talk about this when we got to it. I just wanted to let people know that the work of the policy committee is usually taken up mostly by either state laws that have changed or needs that have come about in the district. The bylaws, which we're going to be reviewing, are not illegal. They're just no longer the way we practice. It's the rules governing ourselves, and there is state guidance about some things. You know, there are roles, what we are required to do by state statute, but a lot of it is just our internal workings. And as we were looking for guidance on agendas and other things, we realized that they've become out of date, and that's no longer how we practice. So we should really just read through them to make sure they reflect either what we are currently doing or what we feel like we should be doing.
So when does the approval come, at the end of the process?
Well, we're going to go through them one by one, just like we would any other policy.
We're going to vote on these four?
4 being presented as first reading.
All right,
But follow the same course as policies.
Okay, good.
Only they need a higher threshold
right.
to go because they're bylaws as opposed to a policy. Policy needs a simple majority of the quorum, and the bylaws require 2/3 of the full board.
Thanks.
Right. Megan, you would like to?
Yeah. Just as getting ready for some of these things and recognizing that we're going to review the policies, we did have our staff go through each one of the policies to find out our practices, so making certain we have alignments there, things that right now we need to make certain that are updated or maybe omitted from the process. And there are some things that are slowing us down in our work. So in having this review where it's not just because the state legislature have changed or what have you, it's also good for us to make certain that we are not only complying, but it's working and it's a functional process for us in practice.
And just to add to that, actually, we have a bylaw that says we're supposed to be reviewing the bylaws every 6 years, right? And so back to your question, the last formal review was when they were first adopted back in '97. So we're a little overdue by my calendar, right? So I think it's good because you could see just how the board's managed itself over the last, I don't know how many years, but probably the last 5+ maybe more 10 years. Is the words don't, the music and the video don't line up anymore, So it kind of takes, it's a little bit of work, but it's not that bad. Some are more worthy of conversation. Others are, 5 seconds. And something we talked about, since we're on the subject, something we talked about with that is that we're going to make sure that going forward, we have the adopted date of a policy or a bylaw and then the revised date of a policy or a bylaw. Make sure that audit is sort of tracked at the bottom so people who are looking at our policies know when the last time that we've consciously reviewed the policy. So with that, you're going to see some of these bylaws or policies for that matter as Megan starts to complete her work. You may read something and say, actually, that is exactly what we do when we don't want to make any changes. CABE is not recommending any material changes. But even just that conscious thought of refreshing that policy so then we can go back and roll the date so people know that we've looked at it and we still think that's the right practice, and we'll put the date that we reaffirmed it. If you look at other school districts, that's how they do it. So it seemed like it made a lot of sense to us. So tonight we're going to start on that journey. So thanks for asking. All right. And new business, AgriScience. Now, drum roll, please.
All right, as Colin puts it up. So, Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Ta-da! It is indeed a congratulations.
Michael.
At this time, we have received 72 applications for our first cohort of students. We did receive 2 late applications, so it was not counted in that because we do have to hold to the deadlines. And there is an appeal process for those 2 if there's a reason that they missed the deadline. However, at this time, we were able to review the 72 applicants. So we've done our first screen. 50 of those applicants are from our sending towns. So to say that that is the marketplace, we ended up with totals that were beyond what they were trending towards when they were sending to Nonawag. We overshot what is typically done. So again, this is a credit to this board. It is a credit to the staff. It is a credit to our communities. And Anthony, I'm going to echo your words. This is only our start. This is not our success point just yet. We still have to go through the process. As I said, the applications were due on January 4th. We're anticipating 6 to 8 weeks for the review process. Each one of the applicants has to have a personal interview as part of the application process. So it is a little bit more. So even though we got to meet them on paper and look through, and I can tell you, and I will tell you, we have a strong application pool. I was slightly excited looking at some of the standardized testing scores, and we have some very serious math students, I'm going to say, since most of the standardized testing that we are able to look at is that. And so we do, when we're reviewing, we look at the students for their attendance. We look at their 2-year report card averages. So there's a transcript that goes with it. We look at standardized testing, personal essays, letters of recommendation. They have the middle school guidance council recommendation. We do look at discipline referrals and, you know, how are their codes of conduct and extracurricular activities. So this is really looking for well-rounded children who are coming in order to enrich themselves here at Chappaq. So wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But again, when we look at this, and I will talk about the breakdown shortly, but just to say where we are on best laid. Oh, there it goes again. I might have overshot it. Okay. So where we are today in looking at our status, things that we had talked about parking being a problem. So I'm just going to kind of skirt through some of these. We just talked about our applications received. In order to alleviate some of the parking issues, we have, working with Don and his crew, they have actually numbered the spots in order to make certain that we're not competing for spots. Everybody feels comfortable not running late to class. Additionally, Greg and the building committee were able to accept the adults by the deadline, so that was good. We were able to meet, and Greg will talk more about that during his part of the presentation. Things that we have to do now. The application that we have in the other districts, a lot of them did not link us up prior to the application process. So we also are hyper aware. We actually advertise and we're marketing late in the game. We really needed to have a lot of this marketing to 7th graders who have that interest. So that way by 8th grade, they know that they're looking at Chappaq. They're already researching. This is what they want to do. So to make certain we have that, even linking up the page and making certain that everything is in line, that we are getting to any student who may be considering a private school. They need to have that decision by December. We were only getting to some of those students in December. So this is now where, as soon as we celebrate, we are getting right into that next marketing campaign, which includes making certain that our brochures are set, going out to the printers, We are getting our union conversations to make certain we recognize the union contract is different for teachers who are agri-science teachers because it is a full year contract. So those are things in which we are certainly having those conversations, and it will come up again. Bob is working with the budget, and that's one that we know we had to postpone that conversation. We had a lot of things going on, but Bob is on it working with Lori Travato and the administration to make certain that everything is accounted for, including the FF&E review. So we want to make certain that everything is aligned. Some issues we currently have, the timing of material purchase, we recognize there's some lead time. We have to factor in some of those really big pieces of equipment when the right time to buy is. So we will be working closely with our vendors to make certain that the program is ready for the students at the time that our labs are set. As soon as we can get as close to ready, we want to have that done. We also know that hiring, we want very specific agri-science teachers. We know that and talking to what are the interests of our applicants, what are the pathways that they're interested in, and make certain that our recruiting is in line with that. We also would like to be able to offer ECE credits. Right now, we're very fortunate. Lori Travato can offer the ECE credits based on her certification and her concentration being in agri-science. That's something that you have to hire for. That's not something that everybody has. So we're certainly looking at those things, and we're keeping that on our horizon. Right now, as the building is in yellow, I know that we're still doing some of those digging. It's what it looks like. It's a lot of digging before we can start laying down. I know that right now they're figuring out the slab and how far to go into that. So, but everything else right now is in the green. So, questions on this slide? And lastly, I just want to show you the application breakdown. These are the applications that we have received. 8th grade, we have 56 8th graders apply, and we had 6 9th graders apply. Of the 6 9th graders, 5 are Chippewa students. So, which actually makes sense when we had the conversation. We didn't have any students go to Nanawag last year. They were waiting for this program. So to say that explains the 6, and then we just had 1 outside student. We did put out to all of the guidance counselors and anybody who was waitlisted at Nanawag, to give out that personal invitation to apply to our program. That did not really come to any additional numbers that we were anticipating. We are female heavy. I guess that is something I'm told is a trend in agri-science, but right now we have the majority of our students are coming from public schools. We have 3 that are from private and non-public schools. Our top pathway choices I've listed under there. The agri-science animal science was by far and away the clear first choice for the majority of our students. So I have to say and compliment this board for things like the riding ring. As soon as I was looking over applications, it makes sense that we have that, though it's attracting a lot of our students who are applying at this time. Plant science, the majority of plant science applicants came from here at Chippewa, which also I'm going to right now say we have enrichment that happens in our 8th graders. They are getting that pathway experience. It does tend to be plant science because of Lori's background, but to say that it has sparked an interest, it has drawn students in. So again, having that enrichment in 8th grade is also leading to more students apply. We have never had the 22 students apply to an agri-science program out of Chippewa. So I think learning about those pathways has really helped draw those applicants here in-house. Environmental science is not a pathway that right now we had advertised for or listed, but it was one of the top choices. So the students got all 8 pathways that the state lists. and they're asked to rank order them 1 to 8. And some of them have no interest and put zeros in some of them. But it was just, it's something to note that right now, environmental science is up on our pathways as a top choice for some of our applicants. And then additionally, food science, which is also another pathway that we are offering here. So, cool. Go ahead, Mike.
Megan, I'm just wondering if any of our previously tuitioned in students went through the application process.
We have a couple. It's not a staggering amount, but it is one that we will work with those families in order to, one, if they are indeed accepted, then work through how that process would work.
And is that I think we're atypical in the sense that we have a fairly large, by process, we have a fairly large tuition in population compared to most other districts. So we're kind of cutting new territory here, I would think.
Yeah, yes, there's definitely some involvement. We're working with the other districts. So they were very aware. We talked to them knowing that they had tuition in students who were coming to us. It does take some working and maneuvering, so we will work with those districts in order to make certain, again, all students are able to apply and have access to the program. So if they do indeed qualify, then at that point we will make certain that we work with those families.
And the other was staff?
A special circumstance that we have. It's an agreement that we have with another district.
Another ag district?
Mhm.
Okay.
Greg?
All right. Well, we continue to move through the project with the building committee. Right now, we have, there have been a lot of areas, if you were to go in, I would strongly suggest you not, into the areas at the north and south end of the building. The concrete is gone, the concrete floors are gone. This has been all dug up. There are trenches. The trenches have been filled with drainage pipes, water drainage pipes, and we will be backfilling those trenches and starting to pour concrete this coming week. And we've got a couple of environmental things we have to handle first. That was we had expected that over by the old auto shop area, and that will be handled, and we'll get back to you with a report on that when we fully understand what we have to do over there. And that's pretty much it. We are continuing to move through the project. We are now paying O&G. We're not really paying other contractors because they are now taking over as general contractor, as construction manager at risk. So they are running these contracts and running the show. We're trying to push up dates as much as possible. I told you last time about a program that they have where they attempt to get people to micro-target their work. So if you've got somebody doing 5 rooms and 2 of them are going to be done by Tuesday and the other 3 are going to be done by Friday, we bring in the next person to work on Wednesday and then the next person to work on the following Monday. So that really is the way it's working, and we're now pushing up the schedule a bit, and we're hoping to get more and more of the work done in August of 19. So we're working very hard to try to push those dates up. We're not going to have the whole thing there, but we're making progress. And I don't know if I have anything else. Megan, is there anything else that you want me to discuss? Yeah.
Greg, I know you said we should expect to see the building coming up, like steel being erected in the March timeframe?
Well, you're asking me a question. I'd have to look at the schedule, but
Just curious, when do you expect them to start digging the foundations?
well, I suppose that's going to start soon. Give me a second. I'm looking for steel and I'm not finding it for some reason.
All right, well, we could just keep it moving. Bob, if you want to talk about the financials.
Sure.
Greg.
As Greg has stated, we're in the process now of paying
the construction management company, O&G, because they finally are submitting bills for actual construction work. We've spent so far $3,386,000. Of that, $1,433,000 is actually for the construction manager at risk. The other money was the pre-construction costs that we already reported on. Of the contract for the O&G portion, they're at 4.87% of payment on a $29 million bill that we owe them. So we're tracking okay, and the contingency stays intact for the most part, and we haven't had huge hits to it, but the things that the board had wanted were in fact incorporated into it. So we're doing okay on that regard.
When do you submit the first reimbursement paperwork to the state?
To the state, I'm in the process of putting it all together, because rather than having me, because the way the state is structured right now, when you go to do this first payment, they're requiring that the superintendent do it, which is kind of odd, but that's what they want, and they want a guest appearance up in Hartford to do it.
I'm not doing it myself.
No, but the
Okay.
reason I say that is it's best because the project will continue on after I'm gone, to tag Megan up with Nicole, and they can jointly go up there and make sure they got a handle on what the state is requiring.
Yeah, I just am curious.
We're okay. I mean, whether we do it for a big amount of money or a small amount of money, it was just better in my mind. We had the dollars to do it. We weren't running short of funds. We were making some money here, so we were doing okay with it. Luckily for us, we borrowed at a point in the market when it was lower. As you all know, the market interest rate went up, so we were making some money, kind of getting close to the break-even point of borrowing, getting money in. And so now it's going to come around. On a positive note, the market for interest right now is come back down. So if we can lock up this meeting with resolving part of our known costs and borrowing short-term for the remainder instead of trying to do this whole thing, you lock it up and you can layer in your interest rates. And right now, Barry's got there is a bond offering coming up on Thursday, which will give us a better indication, but it's come back down. So
That's great.
hopefully we'll catch the right portion of this before it goes away from us again. I was getting a little nervous because they kept
It was, yeah.
quarter here, a
it's going
quarter
up.
there, and suddenly they were talking about another couple of quarters before we get into the marketplace. They backed away from it, and the market's collapsed again back to what it was. So we'll be underneath where we said we were going to be, at least for a large portion of it.
That's great. Well, I'm curious to see how quickly, what the turnaround time is on the state.
Pretty prescribed by the, they take it in, and your first one gets back pretty quickly. That's why I've been holding off. After that, it's months, a couple of months before you get your money. You give them the requisition. It takes them a couple of months to get you your money back.
So,
That's when you're going to see it going in more often.
so just for, in my mind, because our portion, because this is such a large state reimbursement project, 80%, I wouldn't want the bills to get ahead. Like, is that going to be a challenge to manage since
No, because
we've only borrowed, the ban was only 9, right?
9 million, and that's primarily the 9 million is at the end of the project. We should be very close to the $9 million.
Right at the end, but as long as that's
Right.
assuming we've received the other 80% from the state.
And we will.
If right, I just am curious as with the
And
timing.
one's 80, one's in the 30%, but the whole thing comes out. if all things were to cease, we finished. We borrowed 9, and right as we know today, it was like $8,947,000.
But you don't
Which I guess I came pretty close to where the
But
number should
you
be.
don't anticipate us ever needing to borrow more while we're waiting for state money so that ONG's not waiting for money?
No, because, well, when we look at this, you're going to have an opportunity to do that if you need to, because you'll have authorization to go into the short-term market.
Okay.
You just don't want to borrow it if you don't have to.
No. No, that's why I'd rather get reimbursed by the
Once
state
we get our
as-
bond
as
rating in
often as
place,
possible.
that's the step we're in right now, is pulling this data together. You get a bond out there, now you have a good bond rating, okay, which makes it easier to borrow on the band side.
Okay.
And it lowers your borrowing costs. When we did this, we had no rating. Yet
Right.
we still managed to do pretty well with it.
Yeah. No, we did great. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Greg?
I can answer your question on structural steel. Actually, they'll start fabrication of it the day after tomorrow, and it will be here on March 19th, according to the schedule. So that's when you can expect to see structural steel going up. Will be in March.
All right.
Okay.
And then the metal building, the AgStem animal building, I believe is delivered in probably closer to May.
Great, thank you. It's happening. It's real. All right, this is not a drill. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda, action items. So, starting with the top, I think Megan, you're seeking a motion to approve our annual audit report? Or, I'm sorry, I had my eyes down just one. Stephanie,
Yeah.
you're seeking a motion.
I am, but
Floor's
I have
yours.
to discuss the audit a little bit ahead of time. Should we put the motion out first, or do you want me to?
No, you could talk to it first.
Okay. So everyone should have received their hard copies of the audit, should be in front of you. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights from our discussion with Charles from that January 4th meeting, or Charlie Heaven, our auditor. And I'll start with like 3 or 4 main points that we've been discussing with regard to the audit over the last few years. But to start with, we have to present to you a clean, unmodified audit with no exceptions or no material weaknesses found, which has been our historical precedent, and very happy to report that that's the case again this year. He had some really wonderful things to say about our central business office. They, again, did a fantastic job working with him, answering all their questions and providing all the materials that they needed so that we can have a clean audit for you today. He doesn't, their office doesn't assess for fraud, but they do kind of give like a risk assessment for it, and that all kind of comes down to things like proper controls in the office, good financial statements that are being properly reported, that our statements are all in good order, and he had nothing but great glowing things to say about the office, that as soon as he asked for information, we were able to provide it. Seems like the staff all is doing really well with our accounting software. He called it Tyler software, but I think we know it as Infinite Vision. It's a robust system. There's good cooperation in the office. So all of those things kind of point to very low risk. And it was great to hear. I mean, I can say that in my experience over the last year, that's all the same things about everyone in the office and Bob, and that everything is...
Folks do a good job down there.
They do. They really, really do. And it's a testament that we've had several years, or as many years as I can look back on in history, that we've had great, clean audits to present to the community. But if you look at the first couple of pages, 1 through 3 are kind of process about how Charles goes through, how they go through beginning in like May and June and kind of spot check throughout the year. That doesn't really change from year to year. kind of the more meat and the more interesting part to read would be Bob's report from pages 4 to 11. I'll say, a couple of things that you'll see that we've talked about over the last couple of years, and you'll see it show up primarily or first on page 7 under that operating grants and contributions. This is something Charles talked about in a little bit of depth about our need to comply with the latest GASB standards. And GASB is that overall governing body for accounting procedures. And he explained the result of the disclosure requirements that restated the state certified pension obligations as well as the medical for retirees that are incorporated into the audit report. So you'll see some of those numbers pop in and out, but the important thing to note is that these are not expenses that are ours now. The state has talked about passing those costs on to the towns to cover part or all of that liability. But they're potential liabilities, for accounting purposes, they have to be listed as a revenue and an expense. So at the end of the day, it's a net zero to us. And so I guess the important thing to note is that at the moment, we don't have to account for that in our budget, thankfully. That we've talked about the last couple of years. Also, the retirement plan that we operate for non-certified staff is in excellent shape. We're almost completely fully funded. We've had great returns, and Bob has changed the assumptions over the past years. A few years ago, I think we were at like a little over 87% funded. Last year, we were right at about 95%. This year, we're over 95% funded. So that's in great financial condition. What else? I'll say there was one minor area of concern, which is within the cafeteria fund. That's running a little bit of a deficit, but that's primarily as a result of declining enrollment over the years. And again, that's a minor, one of the minor sub-funds that we looked at that wasn't in the positive. And the main point that we like to discuss is on page 49 of the audit. That would be the general fund balance. And we've had discussion on that over the last couple of years too, about how much money goes back to the town and what that's really comprised of. If you look at the bottom line there, the fund balance is at $351,744. That comes from two different areas, our unexpended appropriations and our additional revenue that we are required to give back to the towns. And I think the important thing to note is that in an ideal situation, our unexpended appropriation is as close to zero as possible, meaning that we are using all of the money available to us in our budget, that we're not leaving any left on the table. That additional revenue is, we've got to return, our obligation is to return that back to the towns. We can't keep that. So this year, our unexpended appropriation is at $3,217, which is really good compared to years past. That's about as close to zero as we've gotten in recent years. So I think that notes that we've done a good job at spending all the money available to us, which means it's going back into programs, it's going back into the different funds at school. That number that's going back to the towns, I'll give you the distribution. I don't think, that's not listed in the audit, right? I don't think so, but I've got it here. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, too. 18.82% of that number is going back to Bridgewater. That total number is $66,198.22. Roxbury's getting back 34.45%, which totals to $121,175.81. Washington gets back 46.73%, and that total is $164,369.97. So that's a decent chunk of money going back to the towns. And again, that's all, the bulk of that's coming from revenue, which is tuition in and other savings. Let me see what else is of particular note. I think those were the highlights. We had a over 2-hour meeting with Charles to kind of in-depth go over all of the sub-funds, and it's really interesting. He's great. He was very patient with us and explaining and answering all of our questions. So I guess if there's anyone else on the Finance Committee that has a highlight they want to point out, or if there are any questions about the audit. Yeah, Mike?
I have a question. It's not about the audit, but those funds that we return to the towns, does it go into the town's general funds, or do the towns, are they required to use it as a credit against educational expenses for the upcoming year?
I think that just goes into their general.
They take it in, Mike, as revenue into the towns. What they do with it is it becomes part of their fund balance at that point, and they can use it for offsetting the mill rate, how they do it, and how you say it's attributable to education, or is it attributable to buying a fire? It's in their purview at that point. But they do use it to offset the mill rate.
Greg?
Yeah, I would move that we accept the 2018 Region 12 Annual Audit Report as recommended by the Finance Committee.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, then all those in favor of accepting the audit report as presented by the treasurer this evening, please raise your hands. Debbie, all those opposed? Motion passes unanimously to accept the 2018 annual audit report. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Bob, again.
You're welcome.
When it comes to this, I think it's good that it's boring and unexciting. That means that there's no harm, no foul, and
The way we like it.
absolutely.
We've got a long, historical
Absolutely.
precedence of it, and it's great. It's a nice thing to be able to go back year over year and see that we're trending exactly as we have been. So.
Right.
And we're also able to transfer to the 1% every year, so that's good. There's extra there.
Yep, absolutely. All right, item number 2 is a potential motion to consider and approve the appointment of, speaking of which, our auditor, Charles Haven and Company, for another 5 years. Yeah,
They
just,
have 2 already.
right.
But 19 and 20 is.
Yeah, so it's tacking on 3.
Yes,
Correct.
that's-
To the that's what I thought.
Do we typically do this in 5-year chunks?
Typically, it's either 4 or 5.
Okay, thanks.
Stephanie, do you want
I
to?
just, the reason, maybe a little background, but in doing it this way, we actually bought a year for free. We had an agreement and a contract in place that called for a 4.3% increase for next year. Because of a little arm twisting and a little help, we lowered that to 2.5%, with a 1.5 in each of the 3 years coming up. So combined of this whole thing, we came out netting for 4 years 2.7. So in a way, you could look at, you bought 1 year and had a little left over. It's not a huge amount of money, but in fact, that's what happened. They're also the auditor of record for the 3 underlying towns. So there's a good interrelationship between all of these parties going forward.
Stephanie, do you have any comments? Did you want to share on this?
I'll just add that, we've used Charles for many years, and I think for continuity's sake, it's great to keep him aboard. And Bob did a good job negotiating. It's going to save us a little bit with the new budget coming in. So, it's our recommendation from the Finance Committee to accept and approve that if we.
That would certainly something that I would wholeheartedly support on that point. I mean, first of all, I think he's doing a fine job by all accounts, but the continuity piece I think is critical that we maintain that bridge as we go through this transition. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I would certainly vote in favor of it. Greg?
Yeah, I move that we approve the appointment of Charles Heaven and Company for the fiscal years, June 30, this fiscal year 2019 through 2023, through June 30, 2023, as recommended by the Finance Committee. And I would really, I'm just amazed at how you've got a 5-year deal that averages 1.4% a year in increase.
Negotiations.
I'm sorry?
It's how you negotiate.
Well, you beat him up again, Bob.
That's why Bob got the shovel.
They don't listen, we take the shovel out.
Like, don't let me get the shovel out.
I'll
All right,
second.
so we have second, the motion's been seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? The motion passes unanimously to extend Charles' contract from the current 2019 through June 30th, 2023. Thank you. Item number 3. Stephanie, I'm going to throw this back to you.
Yep, thank you.
And the next one, too, so keep going.
I knew I was going to be talking a little bit. Yeah, we were able to, through savings, we can transfer the full 1%, which we're asking for $218,114 into the capital non-recurring reserve fund. Should I read it as it's written on here?
If you, are you making the motion?
Yeah, I'd like
Then
to.
read it, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To consider and if appropriate in accordance with CGS 10-52, a motion to transfer up to 1% or $218,114 from the approved fiscal year 2018-19 budget appropriation into the reserve fund for capital and non-recurring expenditures as recommended by the Finance Committee at their January 14th, 2019 meeting.
Second.
Okay, motion's been seconded. Any further discussion? All right, all those, oh, Michelle.
Well, I would just say that we realize that we're not at the end of this budget year, but we're tracking so that this is available. And obviously, if something were to happen and we needed it, we would be able to pull it back.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah.
That's a good point. Okay, any further questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion as described on the agenda and read by Stephanie, please raise your hand. All those opposed? All right, the motion passes to transfer $218,114 for the fiscal year to the reserve fund. Thank you. Stephanie, again.
Yeah, it's our contract, for our transportation contract with All-Star is ending. So we discussed at the January 4th meeting about Bob beginning negotiations with them. We are in a good place to do that, and we think that he can come up with some good some good deals for the next couple years.
Maybe it'd be the last deal.
the best last deal. Yeah, we not sure what else we're at liberty to discuss before you can negotiate. But,
No, it's, at this point in time, you're dealing with the incumbent, and it's only to begin a negotiation process so that we can put it together. It's probably the best alternative at the moment, because if we don't, and we try to bid this thing, there's nobody out there. So we're, not that he's gonna hold us hostage, but we're in a better position if we negotiate it, because if we go to bid, as a district around us has done, the number that came back at the table was ugly. And he more or less said he offered them a better deal by negotiating rather than bidding, because that's the nature of the beast. So I think we can work a fairly good deal with this thing. It's going to cost a little bit of difference between the past to today, because the federal government made some changes as to how to finance things through the Dodd-Frank and whatnot, but it's not going to be a killer. and it'll stabilize you for 5 years.
The Finance Committee discussed this at pretty good length, and we feel that it is in the board's best interest to waive our bidding requirement, which we are allowed to do by policy. I just am not clear as to whether we would do that now or when the bid,
need that.
when the negotiation has.
Greg?
I move that we waive the policy requiring a bidding of this
Service contract.
I move that we waive our bidding requirement for this contract, and instead commence negotiations on a sole source basis. I think this makes sense, simply because if you're going to end up paying more to put it out to bid, and I think we have a pretty clear expectation after many years with this company of understanding what the costs are for it, that I don't think that the bidding process will cause us to achieve a reduction in cost, which is what our goal is through the bidding process. So I'd make that motion to waive it.
I'll second.
Okay. Any further comments?
This requires a 2/3 vote, Mr. Chairman.
Waiving the policy, right? Yeah.
I'll just add that there are very few, if any, other vendors to get a bid from anyway. So, it really does seem in our best interest to negotiate before going out to bid, where we could, like Greg said, potentially be paying more for the same person. So,
I did contact other superintendents around our area, and the vast majority, it is All-Star in our surrounding area. So we were looking to see if it was even something that was worth pursuing. So
Yeah, the choices here are quite narrow, right? It's either we decide to
You have a good
get into the
contract.
business of operating our own busing company, or we deal with All-Star.
And if they weren't performing, it would be in your best interest to go out, but their performance has been there. Their maintenance of equipment, you can see it, and we don't have a lot of issues with breakdowns and so forth. Their schedule of maintenance, and we get our annual inspections of all these vehicles coming back from DMV, and everything's, we don't have red ticketed buses at all. I mean, when there's an issue, it's just normal wear and tear. It has nothing to do with a lack of maintenance. If anything, John maintains those vehicles because he knows at the end of the day he can offload those and they're not going to be sitting in a parking lot somewhere year upon year waiting for sale. He can get rid of them very, very easily because he maintains them over the life of them. But
Right.
it is going to require all new vehicles.
Okay. So, any further comments, Michelle?
I was just going to say it's policy 3323, and you're correct, it is 2/3.
2/3, right. Thank you. All right. So then, all those in favor of the motion as read by Greg to waive our policy regarding an RFP, we're going out to bid, to begin negotiations with All-Star. Please raise your hand. All those opposed? All right, we have the 2/3 threshold. We've met that. That's unanimous. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we begin negotiations for a transportation contract with All-Star Transportation as recommended by the Finance Committee at their January 4, 2019 meeting.
Second?
All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Greg. Moving on to item number 5. Stephanie's finally finished.
Good
I will
job,
take
Stephanie.
over. All right. At this time, this is a last meeting. I had presented both the Monday and Thursday meeting calendars. In hearing the conversation with the board that Thursday was not conducive to many of you, we will stay with the Monday. We will continue to work with the towns in order for our postings. So at this time, I have presented the Monday meetings schedule as below. So
And Megan, as a point of clarification, the state requirement is just that the board, that they get an annual calendar for the board meetings, right? The fact that the committee meetings are there is just it's irrelevant to the state, right? Okay.
Correct. This is about posting board meetings.
Right, this is about the person board, right. Okay. Do I have a motion? Or Jen?
I just was gonna ask a question, but we can wait till after,
Okay,
I mean, about this.
okay.
I'll make the motion then. I move that we, oh boy, I lost the agenda here.
Somebody else want to make the motion?
I move that we approve the Board of Education meeting schedule for the 2019-2020 school year, the Monday schedule.
Okay. Now, Jen.
I had suggested at the last meeting about possibly not having a meeting right before Christmas, and I see that the 16th is on here. So I just recommend that maybe we consider, not maybe, but that we consider either doing December 2nd and December 9th, because I just think that having staff here the week before Christmas, selfishly, not just us, but the staff as well, I think would be nice. So that's my recommendation. Any?
Peter?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I have no problems with it. I would support it if the rest of the board members would support it.
Let me, is school's in session, right?
Yep.
During that time? The only thing that would give me pause would be, we would have a meeting basically 2 weeks in a row, which then makes the December 7th meeting potentially perhaps a very light agenda. You know, and at that point, do we even need that meeting? So the thought, because we did discuss this, a thought would be to leave the meeting as scheduled, and we could either, when we get closer, because we're not obligated, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, the state, we have a requirement to tell the state when we plan on meeting. We could change those dates, right? So when we get closer to it, if we decide that we don't need that one towards the end of December, we can cancel it altogether, and we'll wind up with the same one board meeting.
I noticed that we have 2 in a row coming up, so, and we've done it before. So I just think that in terms of just planning the year, we could also just plan around that. I mean, we've had 2 weeks every once in a while in a row anyway. And again, I just think out of a courtesy to the staff, the week before Christmas, it's not a big deal. I mean, we could keep it on the calendar, but as we get closer, the likelihood that it would get taken off.
What's the date of the
probably
December
isn't.
meeting?
16th. It's not, I mean, it's
Not that close to the holidays.
a week before. It's not a big deal. I just think it's just courteous
just-
and considerate.
Anybody else?
Well, having missed our last meeting, which was the second meeting of December, I would speak in favor of actually moving that one to the 9th. Just, it's a busy time of year for everybody. And I would put it on for the 9th, and then if we choose to cancel it because it's light, we could, but that way we can plan accordingly. So I would be in favor of that.
I would accept a friendly amendment to my motion to approve the calendar to make it December meetings on the 2nd and the 9th, as Ms. Pody has suggested.
A second.
Okay. Stephanie? Did you have a comment?
I was going to second that, but also just can say that that was an extremely busy time for for us that week as well. And I think we actually have 4 meetings in a row coming up, so which we might want to take a look at in March. So,
We have 4 meetings.
yeah, I'd support doing the 2nd and the 9th.
Hang on. Okay, any further comments? All right, all those in favor of the meeting schedule as proposed and amended by Greg to remove the one meeting in December, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously to adopt the meeting schedule. Thank you. All right. Policies. Michelle.
All right, we have 2 policies on our agenda for second reading. And I just wanted to say that I noticed in our packet this time, the first reading draft was published, as well as the one for second reading, and I find that really helpful, because we can see what was new, because it was a long time ago that we talked about this. This was the beginning of December. I think we talked about, the first reading, I believe, was December 3rd. So it was a while ago. So if you want to refresh your memory as to the updates. So we'll start with the first one, 4212.42. This is, wait, let me just check the agenda. Yeah. This is adding training for the bus drivers who, by state law, are now required to undergo training for EpiPens. This will be handled by the bus company. And my notes, I don't actually remember much of the conversation, but my notes said that there were no requests for changes to what was proposed.
I move we adopt proposed policy 4212.42, drug and alcohol testing and training for school bus drivers, for a second reading.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously to adopt, I'm sorry, 4212.42 for the records. Thank you.
Okay.
Next.
Policy on the agenda, 5144.1, physical restraint, seclusion, exclusionary time out. If you open the original document that we looked at for first reading, the new language is in yellow. This is due to a state law. This is mandated. And my notes showed that there were no requests for changes to what was proposed. So if you have questions about the policy itself, I would direct those to Megan because she's more familiar with this. But just for procedurally, there were no requests for change.
Greg.
I'd like to move we adopt proposed policy 5144.1, physical restraint / seclusion / exclusionary timeout, for a second reading.
I'll second.
Thanks. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, the motion to adopt policy 5144.1 as described here in the agenda passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so moving to bylaws. We're going to, I think we're going to, maybe we could start in the order it was presented. That's fine. It's probably very, actually. So we'll go slightly out of order. The first point I wanted to make tonight is that the numbering is incorrect on both the agenda and also in the copy you have in there. It should read 9325.5. 9325.5. Right, so this is a brand new, this is a new bylaw for us. We do not have anything governing the use of a consent agenda or how it's used. So this is this is a wholesale addition. Couple of comments. The consent agenda is an opportunity for the board to operate more efficiently and more effectively. In looking at some of these bylaws, and you look at, you know, what CABE would suggest, what other districts do in this area, it's clear, I think, that we have an opportunity to use this tool a lot more frequently and effectively than we usually do. So let me give you an example. Another district would like we have first readings of a policy where we go through a lot of discussion potentially, and or we go through perhaps minimal discussion and there are no recommended changes, or there's like a single word change, or just something that's administrative in nature, that policy would not come back up on the agenda again. The policy, as part of the body of the agenda, that policy would be presented back to the board as part of the consent agenda. So it would be submitted as part of your board package with the changes made as requested. And since it's, if you read the bylaw, the suggestion is that it's non-controversial and doesn't require further discussion. We do not need to go through the formality of making a motion, having it second, taking a vote. The fact that it's there, it's on a list, we could just dismiss and plow through it quickly. So that's something I think I'd like to try to bring in as we go forward, to try to do that, because it just cuts down on the time of the meeting. And you know, there are other things. For example, there'll probably be other opportunities like field trips to Boston that we have to approve because it's out of state, but we do it routinely. We could add that to the consent agenda. Doesn't discuss, you know, require a lot of discussion. That said, any board member can look at a list of items that are on the consent agenda and say, item number 3, I would like removed from the consent agenda. At that point, that item is removed from the consent agenda and is moved down into the regular discussion, and then it'll open the floor up to debate. So the person who asked for it to be removed can make the point they want to make, and the board gets to debate it. It's the request to remove something from a consent agenda is not debatable of and in itself. Everybody here has the unilateral right to request something to be removed without question. So if we had 5 policies on there, and Greg, I'll pick on you, and you saw something that maybe, you know, there was a nuance in the language you requested that wasn't reflected there, and you say, of the 5, I'd like this one to be brought back to the floor. The other 4 get to stay. So it's not like one pulls because it's the same theme or subject. It doesn't pull them all off the consent agenda. So that's basically what this bylaw talks about. So at that point, I'll open it up. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could handle some parts of the policy agenda on the consent, but I would never use it for first readings.
No.
I think it should be used only for second readings of policies where there were no issues raised, there was no added language or anything like that. It was a clean, we talked about it once, not controversial, we're all good with it, no issues, and then we bring it back for a second reading. We can put that on the consent agenda.
I would absolutely
So I
agree.
think that makes some sense to do that, and I'd be in favor of this. Otherwise, I think this basically reads according to our practice now of how we do this.
Correct.
So I'd move that we adopt for a first reading proposed bylaw 9325.21.
Second.
Point 5, Greg. 9325.5.
Point 5. Well, I'm looking at the one.
Yeah,
in front of me.
I know.
I wasn't sure what was wrong.
Just typo. Do I have a second?
I second.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Any further comments, discussion? All those, Michael?
I just want to say, you know, as a board member, I really appreciate that we're moving forward with this policy because, you know, I don't miss those midnight meetings. If anything that can get us to more efficient meetings, I think it would be appreciated by all of the board.
Great. All right. Again, it's 2/3, so we'll, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? All right. The motion passes unanimously on the first reading of bylaw 9325.5, consent agenda. All right. Now, going back to the top of the list. So the first bylaw we have is 9,000, and it talks about the powers and purpose and duty of this board. What you see in front of you, blue language is new language, red strike is the old language, And anything that remains in just black is what was there originally and what will remain there. The red line was done in comparison to CABE and also looking at another school district to see how they were doing this. And that district that we happened to look at was Avon. So in reading CABE's recommendation, in reading what we had, and then reading or adopting, I should say, for our purposes, what Avon had, it was the recommendation of the committee that we essentially adopt the language in blue to update this bylaw. Question?
To put it on the table, I'll move that we adopt, for first reading, proposed bylaw 9,000.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, the motion's been second. Is there anybody else from the bylaws committee that wants to say something here? Michelle?
Well, I would just point out the note that's in the margin because it looks like we struck the whole roles and responsibilities of the board, but they actually show up in another policy. And part of this is to keep in alignment with CABE, which is really useful for us to keep our policies in alignment with what CABE has because it makes housekeeping and auditing moving forward easier when we stay in alignment with them. But it also, so those roles and responsibilities are not disappearing. So that would be the first thing I would want to point out. And the way, we spent a lot of time talking about sort of where there were duplicate policy or, the bylaws, where we were repeating ourselves and where we weren't, where things best fit. And so this first bylaw 9,000 is sort of a nice intro to the roles and of the board and the purpose of the bylaws, whereas roles and responsibilities of the board members as a list will come a little bit later. So I don't know if that clarifies it exactly, but.
Michael? No, it's a good point.
Just seconding what Michelle was saying, I want to assure the board that we spent quite a bit of time looking at these four. It wasn't like we just looked at, oh, CABE says we'll do this, and that sounds good. We went through it with a fine-tooth comb, with that idea of making sure that we're not that we're considering everything that they're saying. We're not just rubber stamping what CABE says. We're not just rubber stamping what another district does. And I think what was useful to us as a committee is that it's an interesting process. I wish it didn't take us 22 years, to go back to a point that you had made earlier, to look at the bylaws, because I think it really gets us to consider what the board's doing as a whole. I think it's a really great exercise for the board.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting discussions, to say the least, for sure. So the first paragraph introduces the fact that we're going to have bylaws. The second paragraph addresses the source of the board's authority. Where does it come from? The third paragraph makes clear that we're acting as agents of the state. And I know that's been a point that's been made a number of times over the years, and people would say, well, where is that? And, that brings that to the surface. And the last paragraph talks about basically the role of the board versus the role of the superintendent and the staff of the schools. That our role is to govern. We delegate the administrative functions and the role of the CEO to the superintendent of the district. And go from there. So I think these are very salient points, and we've talked about this as board many times. Where do we stop? Where does the superintendent begin? And I think this brings clarity like we haven't had. So, any further? Motion's on the floor, so any further discussion, Greg?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I know bylaws, and I was very impressed. You did a great job on these. So thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of the committee. Seriously. All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously on first on first reading of bylaw 9,000, powers, purpose, and duty. Before we move to the next one, getting back to the consent agenda, since we have a bylaw now that sort of, so we've had no changes on 9325.5. We've had no changes on 9,000. So my intention would be at the next board meeting to put these two on the consent agenda. Just as we could start to retrain ourselves to be, to leverage that, right? Okay. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. All right, next one, 9010. 9010 is limits of authority. Okay, so again, anything that you see in red that's underlined is new language. Anything that's red and stricken is old language. This was, I'll say this policy was our old, it tracks in terms of what did our old policy or bylaw say and versus what's being said in the new one. The new version does it in a lot less words, a lot more to the point, and I think much more objectively than subjectively in terms of where our authority ends as board members. This language predominantly was CAPE, right? So, yeah. Michelle, Michael, anything else you want to add to that?
No.
No, Michael?
I think the only thing that we talked about as a subcommittee was that this particular bylaw might be the type of bylaw that we want to really highlight for new board members. That's a process that we're facing potentially, every year, every other year with new board members, and just really spelling out very clearly what would be acceptable as a board member. Could you speak for the board? And the answer is no, if you look at the bylaw, unless you happen to be the chairman or appointed to speak for the board. So I think it would be a useful tool if we were trying to put together some educational materials for new board members.
That's a good mention, because I think when we get through all the bylaws, my thought would be to turn to that handbook. And while it's sort of still all fresh in our heads, is rewrite that handbook to get exactly at what you were talking about. Since all this stuff is like, it's like what are the points out of each one of these things that really we want to make sure people know. So it's a great idea. Julie?
Just small point, but the title of it being limits of authority seems a little bit of a misnomer, because it looks to me like it's our roles and responsibilities, which is a really great list. I wish I had that when I came on the board, just to know what we're supposed to do. But anyway, I don't know if the title matches what that policy is really all about there.
It kind of does.
It does?
It's
Okay.
a little counterintuitive, because I had the same first impression. I was looking for, you can't do this and you can't do that.
Right.
But as Mike pointed out in the first paragraph, that's really where it talks about its limitations. It says it's limited on the previous policy we just, but specifically, none of us have the authority to act as an individual unless we've been
The
granted
first
that.
paragraph makes sense. It's just
Right.
that the second piece really is our
Well,
roles as opposed to.
The rest of it is really how you could be a good board member by behaving this way, right?
Okay.
It's personally, I mean, we could X out all that language behind the first paragraph, and I don't think it would change the intent of the
Right.
bylaw,
Right.
to be honest. But, Greg?
Yeah, I have a little bit of trouble with that first sentence under elected members of the Board of Education. It says we're expected to represent and balance the educational interests of students in the public schools, district citizens, and the state of Connecticut. Actually, I don't know that that's accurate. I think what our duty and obligation under the law is to educate the children of this region. And I don't know about balancing interests. Does that mean that you should not vote for budgets that increase taxes if you believe that that balances the? I mean, I think this is straying off of what I took to be the mission of a Board of Ed. Practically speaking, you better balance the issue, the interests, or you're going to get yourself removed from office in the next election. You know, but nonetheless, I don't know. I think this is inconsistent with the statute.
Actually, the statute talks in that it says to provide an education within reason, if I recall.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to.
And that's what this is getting at, is within reason, is not at any cost, not fill in the blank in terms of the circumstance. And I think what makes a robust board is a true balance of all the requirements that we have back to the taxpayers, or we have fiduciary responsibility when we deliver budgets, when we administer budgets. So I do think there is a balance there, and it's not at any cost.
And I think we had an interesting conversation in the committee about the issue that you're talking about, because I think the stereotype is that the Board of Education is only concerned about education, and it doesn't consider any other factors other than, is this educationally appropriate or not. And so I think the public sometimes looks at the boards as kind of isolated from common sense, isolated from other factors. I think this language carefully spells out that we are living in the real world as board members. We are looking at multiple factors when we're trying to make a decision. And I think the other stereotype of the citizen who is always going to be against board policy because they see dollar signs is equally incorrect. That you can't be a board member without, increasing taxes and hurting taxpayers, I think is a really poor way of looking at it. And I think we constantly have to fight that stereotype.
Michelle?
I just also wanted to say that I paused at that statement as well, because I was sort of surprised by it. But this language came from CABE, and their number one job is to advocate for children in this state. So I feel that I trust their interpretation and purpose, and I think they're trying to help us with the community, the way Michael was just explaining, because we are here for the interest of the students, and that is within the world they live in and the communities we live in. So I think just reminding us of the balance is not, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Further comment? Greg?
Well, I mean, if you read General Statute 10-220, it says each local or regional board of education shall maintain good public elementary and secondary schools, implement the educational interests of the state, as defined in Section 10-4A, and provide such other educational activities as in its judgment will best serve the interests of the school district, provided any board of education may secure such opportunities in another school district, in accordance with the provisions of the general statutes, to give all the children in the school district, including children receiving alternative education, as nearly equal advantages as may be practicable, shall provide an appropriate learning environment. And it goes on to talk about the learning environment, what we have to do, good schools, all of this stuff. I don't see anything about balancing the needs of the community.
So you're suggesting, like when we went to referendum on Ag STEM, we needed to get the approval of the taxpayers, and we needed to present them with a valid argument as to why we were going to ask them to support the project. I mean, we're not suggesting that well, first of all, we have to legally, and to get a majority vote in these towns, we have to have citizens or taxpayers who don't have children in the system. Right, so we're not going to, I don't think you're suggesting that we're going to say that we're going to disregard their interests.
Well, no, what I'm suggesting is that there's that if this is what CABE thinks the statute says, because this statute's entitled Duties of Boards of Education. If this is what CABE thinks the statute says, I mean, look, I there's thousands of words in this particular statute, and I might have missed the one thing that caused them to do this, but I see nothing in here supporting this as a reasonable interpretation of the statute. Look, that's practically speaking what a Board of Education does. You know, we can't get out over our skis and suggest to people that, you know, we should do nothing but spend in order to promote educational opportunities. But I don't want to be standing on a hill that I'm going to die on over providing education for our children and have someone say, well, why aren't you balancing the needs of the community? You know, sometimes the needs of the community or the desires of the community may or may not be really readily stated, or they may not be cogent. I mean, anyone who would suggest that our schools are expensive and that we are profitably spending on education here really needs to take a careful look at what we're doing. Because it's not the case. And so I think that's where the big rub is, when people are concerned that we have gone overboard on some project. And I think this board has very carefully drawn lines that keep the cost pretty much a bargain for the school, considering the high level of schools we have. But I think the problem I have with this is not that I'm looking forward to a budget fight. I'm not. I mean, frankly, we've been reasonable on that. We haven't put forward budgets that are crazy. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to say that our duty is to do this when we're walking around telling everybody our duty is to educate the kids. That's what the statute says. That's what we have to do. We have to educate the kids. And if that means, in our judgment, this program X is necessary, whether it be Ag STEM or something else, that's what our judgment is, and that's what we're allowed to do. And there's no question of balancing the needs. Practically speaking, we will. But I think to put that formally in there, it does not do justice to this statute. That's all I'm saying.
But so is there objection of just having it in there because it's just good common practice?
Well, I think it's wrong. I don't think that's what the statute says, unless someone can educate me that I've missed something in this long statute. I don't think that's what the statute says, and I'm not prepared to vote in favor of this bylaw as long as it contains that language.
Julie?
I was just going to suggest if we just said that we're expected to represent the educational interests and listed the 3 areas and just took out the 2 words "and balance," that seems to maybe satisfy, Greg? At least make it more palatable, perhaps?
Oh, I have to find it. No, here it is. Well, see, I just don't like the whole, I don't like the whole language. I think it's, we would be better off to track the statute. You know, our duty is to maintain good public elementary and secondary schools and implement the educational interests of the state. And whatever else you want to add about educating the students in this district, you know, give all the students, including those, you know, nearly equal advantages as may be practicable. Whatever you want to do, but I don't understand why they haven't tracked the statute as our duties, because that's what the statute says.
Sure.
I agree with Greg. I don't think they're trying to explain that this is what the statute is saying. I think they're trying to explain good practice. And if this is taken to be what statute says, then that puts us at a disadvantage. So I could see the logic in sticking to the statute, since the policy is called limits of authority, and it's implying that it's tracking the statute, it cites the statute. I can see the logic in not adding the language that talks about balance, even though we all know that that's what we have to do.
So I have a suggestion, because we did talk about this, I recall.
We did.
It was a long meeting, but a productive one. You know, if you look at my earlier comment about everything below the first paragraph is recommendations on what a good board looks like, which always felt to me more like handbook material, not bylaw material. So one possible solution to this, and, you know, again, I'm not saying that we couldn't massage the first sentence further, but to perhaps take everything below the first paragraph, we take it out of the bylaw, and we put it into a policy handbook. And that's where it can live, perhaps.
I like it better in the bylaw because it sort of
I thought you were advocating to take it out.
no, just that one sentence, the little balance part that Greg
So
was
Julie's recommendation is take the,
yeah, or massage the language maybe even a little bit more because that is coming straight from statute. Members of the Board of Education are expected to represent the educational interests of students in the public schools and the state of Connecticut. The only things that are not in the statute are
District.
balance and district citizens.
okay.
Just a suggestion, maybe we can bring it back to the subcommittee, because I'd like to see what, you know, if we query CABE on this.
This is Cave's language.
Right. Why did you come up with,
oh.
when Greg's pointing out that the state statute is reading X, why did you come up with Y? Like, what is your thinking there?
Mhm.
I'd like to see what they say to that, and I think it might
That's interesting.
maybe address some of his concerns.
That's good,
or-
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just
Okay.
I like the rest of it to be in the bylaws. I have full confidence that we will produce a handbook that will,
Mhm.
but somehow this is voted
Okay.
on. It lives on the website. I don't know.
All right, so we need to just rework that first sentence.
Could I just make a suggestion? If you read subsection B, subdivision B of this statute, this is where you involve the local citizens. And it says the Board of Education shall, with the participation of parents, students, and school administrators, teachers, citizens, local and elected officials, and any other individuals and groups such board shall deem appropriate, prepare a statement of educational goals for such local or regional school district. So you see, that's where you involve your local citizens, is in actually establishing your goals to go forward. You listen to them. It's not that you don't pay any attention, but it's not balancing that against the educational needs of the students. It's involving local citizens and elected officials in goal setting. And I would feel a little bit more comfortable if we made that distinction. And you can leave all the whole laundry list of things in there. I think they're all good things.
Okay.
But maybe if we could just make that distinction, or at least ask CABE why they phrased it the way they did, because it does not seem consistent with the statute.
Okay, we'll take that back, but we still have a motion on the floor. I think we have do we have a motion on the floor? No, we don't have a motion on the floor for first reading. John?
Could I add one more thing to the, involving the district citizenry? We have to ask ourselves, then why have 12 members which represent the 3 towns? And we are elected by the citizenry to fulfill the duties of the board. So I think to balance the 3, the schools, the educational process, have a responsibility to the district citizens and the state of Connecticut. I think it's perfect. I think it's progressive, it's forward-thinking, and I don't think that you can separate the 3 entities.
Okay. All right, we have to take a 1-minute break. Okay, and we're back. So we know what we want to go back and reinvestigate. So can I have a motion to pass this first reading? Second?
Second?
Thank you, John. Any further discussion? Yes?
I don't think it should be passed for a first reading. I think it needs work. I listened to what John said, and I think that he's right that those pieces are in there. I just don't think they're stated as eloquently as they could. So rather than approve it for a first reading, I think we should just bring it back, send it back to committee for just a little tweaking and investigation, and then it can be brought in for a first reading. We could discuss it again, and then eventually it'll make its way onto a consent agenda for a second reading.
And not wanting to bring it back as a second reading with the language Okay, anybody else? So there's a motion on the floor to pass this for first reading. Any other comments? All right. Again, for first reading, it still requires eight votes. We're down to 9 since Michelle had to leave. So all those in favor of first reading, please raise your hand. For first reading, to come back and knowing that we have to rework that sentence. I can't see. All right, all those opposed? All right, the motion fails. All right, next one is 9012. Legal responsibilities of the board. You can see here again, everything in black was the original language. Everything in red with an underscore is new. Strikeout is old. I think it's pretty self-explanatory what this is. And again, it's not much has changed. That's, I guess, the good news. Oh. Yeah. Sorry, Greg, did you have a question?
I did, but I can't find it. There was something in here about negotiated contract. No, that's actually not what I was looking for.
To negotiate legal contracts.
There was a reference specifically to statutes.
Reference to what? Item D, 13D?
I wonder if it was in a different bylaw, but I thought it was in this one. It was a,
Period prescribed general statutes equal to
I was just gonna
opportunity.
suggest that we say in
receive the
accordance with
reason.
law, but I can't find the reference, so I guess I can't.
13A,
Look at 15.
15 or 13A.
Yeah, it's, unfortunately, you can't write on these things, so I wasn't able to write on it.
13 says as defined by law.
No, that's not it.
Okay.
That's not the one I'm looking for. Okay, I can't find it, so I'll have to come back on a second reading and deal with it. I haven't seen any problems with it. Just can't find it now.
Right? Any other questions, comments? I need a motion. Michael?
I move that we accept for first reading by law 9012, legal responsibilities.
Thank you, John. All those in favor of first reading on 9012, legal responsibilities, please raise your hand. Okay, all those opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And do I have a motion to go into executive session? So moved. Okay. We are going to, where are we going? Well, okay. We will move to executive session wherever we're going. And